In a recent essay of his, Paul Graham posed a question, paraphrased. Is it so bad that people will write less and less as AI can simply do it for them? Isn't it common for skills to disappear when technology makes them obsolete? There aren't many blacksmiths left, and it doesn't seem to be a problem. To which he answers, yes, it's bad. The reason is that writing is thinking. In fact, there's a kind of thinking that can only be done by writing. If you have any sort of consistent writing practice, then you know this to be true. Writing is the antidote to fuzzy thinking, vagueness, confusion, fragmentation, and incoherence. That's why Jeff Bezos famously banned PowerPoint presentations and requires 6-page written memos before meetings at Amazon.
When you have to write your ideas out in complete sentences and complete paragraphs, it forces a deeper clarity of thinking.
Or Joanne Didion, who said, I don't know what I think until I try to write it down. Philosopher Wittgenstein, emphasizing the importance of synthesis when he said the problems are solved not by giving new information, but by arranging what we have known since long. Writing is thinking, and it's more important than ever in a world where our minds are so active, so filled with information, ideas, concepts, and thoughts that we haven't externalized nor processed. And so in this video, we're going to look at why writing makes you a better thinker and how to develop your own writing practices or set of practices to actively compound your thinking. First of all, it helps to view writing as a sort of metacognitive loop. Writing requires you to totally immerse yourself in the thinking and rethinking process. Stephen Mintz. As you write, you're not just putting words on the page. You're not simply taking thoughts from your head and putting them on paper. You're actively synthesizing and structuring and restructuring what's going on in your head. You're running through this loop of externalization, observation, analysis, integration, and incubation. Let's break this down a bit. To start, we have externalization. This is the process of writing and thinking. You cannot write words on the page without thinking, and you can't truly think in an externalized fashion without externalizing your thoughts, without writing. Of course, you can talk, you can converse, you can dictate, and that is a form of externalization that's useful, but it's not the same as writing, which we're going to look at later. As you externalize and you write, you automatically start observing and analyzing. You think about your thinking, right? The words on the page reflect back to you in a way that doesn't happen when those thoughts just sit in your mind. And then there's this process of integration and incubation. Your externalized thoughts feed back into your own head. They extend, they enhance, they update, they replace the prior non-externalized thoughts. So to give you an example, perhaps you have an idea for an article that you want to write about. And this is a topic that you've kind of come up with yourself. It's not out there. You're struggling to explain it. You're struggling to think about it. It just kind of sits there and you start writing about it. And as you're writing, it starts to develop. And this idea that was once non-externalized, that once only existed in your mind, has now been updated and improved by the act of writing, by externalization. You might not be at 100% yet, but you've got something better now. You've got a clearer picture of what it is that you want to articulate and externalize. And maybe you couldn't get there, you couldn't get to that level of clarity without writing it out. You've reintegrated your thought. You've externalized, you've observed it, it's fed back, and it's updated your thinking. But the real magic in this process is the incubation, right? When you update these thoughts and these ideas and these concepts through the act of writing, your subconscious then goes to work on it. This is the incubation that Graham Wallace talks about in The Art of Thought. It's a great book, by the way. You do all this work beforehand, you prepare, you kind of exert yourself, and then you go away, you step back. And maybe it's 2 days later and you're having a shower or you're going for a walk and it hits you, right? This incubation has taken place. You haven't even been that aware of it. And now you've got clarity. And so the act of externalization in writing improves that incubation process because it improves the models in your own head. Now, these are not completely distinct and isolated steps. There's a huge amount of overlap in the sense that Integration and incubation is happening as you write, but also after you're finished writing and go about your day. And as with all models, it's a poor representation of what is really a conscious and subconscious process, but it's fun to conceptualize anyway. The problem with writing is that it can often feel inefficient, which is probably why so many of us avoid doing it, or we just jump to using AI tools as a replacement for it rather than an enhancement, which is what I think it should be used for. Why would you engage in the slow, difficult, frustrating process of writing when you can just use a computer to do the heavy lifting? Why would you write a 2,000 word breakdown of a concept or thought that's in your head when you can just write a 50-word prompt and get 2,000 words fed back at you with ease? It seems inefficient, but it's only inefficient if your goal is speed, which it shouldn't be, because we're talking about how to think better. Taking unformed, unstructured, fragmented ideas and concepts in your own head and synthesizing them into something clearer and better is not an easy thing to do. It's not a factory-like process where efficiency is the aim. You want effectiveness. You don't just want speed to results, but speed to desired results, which is clarity of mind, being able to articulate what you're thinking, being able to actually develop the ideas in your head, to make decisions, to solve problems that are bugging you. Back to the Amazon example, I can't remember where it was, but I think Jeff Bezos said that writing these 6-page memos that they do, it can take weeks, right? Weeks. Is that efficient? Not if the goal is speed, but if you want better thinking and better results, it might actually be the fastest path and most efficient path to them. So when you're writing to think, to learn, to understand, there's a level of perceived inefficiency that must not only be tolerated, but also embraced, because it's in that inefficiency that lies mental growth. But why writing? Why can't we just pick up our phone and talk to it and do voice memos and have AI transcribe it? Why can't we just externalize our thoughts to a friend? Well, we can do all these things, and we should. I think we should use multiple mediums of externalization, but writing is unique in that it forces complete thoughts. It requires an explicitness and precision because you can't fill in the gaps with gesture or tone or body language the same way you can when you're talking to someone. It also creates a distance between thought and expression that enables a unique type of mental reflection. We talked about this in the metacognitive loop. There's this feedback that happens, and it engages the visual system, our eyes, in a way that other forms of externalization don't. I don't know what the science is there, but it's just different, right? So it's going to have different effects on the mind when you see the words in front of you as you're thinking, as you're writing. And going a layer deeper, there's actually a difference between typing and writing longhand. If you want to think well, you should use both mediums. Typing is more efficient. There's less friction between thought and its externalization. And I find that for more exploratory writing, where I'm trying to develop an idea, see where it leads, I'm open to new ideas, I'm open to whatever, it can be a lot better because I'm not bottlenecked by the speed. I'm not thinking too much. And so I can go down different paths and write about various topics and sort of let my mind run free in a way that I wouldn't do if I'm writing longhand and I'm thinking more kind of precisely about every word that I'm putting down. Conversely, the friction involved in writing by hand has its own benefits. It forces you to slow down, to think in more accurate and precise terms. And there's something tactile about it. The words have more value because they require more effort to write. And so you tend not to write as much nonsense and filler and so on. Anyway, I think with externalization, you should use all mediums, including talking, but especially with writing, try and do both longhand and typing. In general, I find myself more and more finding ways to use pen and paper for things because I spend too much time at the computer, and I've noticed it just allows me to focus better and think better, but your mileage may vary. Writing is also a process of exploration and evolution. It's not just a way to think better. It's not just a way to structure your thoughts. It's a way to come across new insights. Just like if you were having a conversation with a friend about a topic and you would go on tangents and explore new avenues and ideas, writing is similar. It's a conversation with yourself, the externalized version of yourself. And so with writing, just as with thinking, what you start with isn't necessarily what you end with. I can't tell you how many times I've started journaling about something going on in my life, only for it to turn into an entire essay on a topic that evolved from a simple personal reflection. Or the times I've been taking notes on a book that I've read and it sparked an idea for a video, which I then feel an urge to write an entire script on. You want to embrace this exploration, this evolution, as much as you can, because it's what leads to great insight. It's the creative part of thinking that you mustn't ignore. And you can apply it in your work life and business. Perhaps you're writing a strategy document for your marketing efforts over the next 90 days, and then it sparks an idea for a product. Well, go and write about it. You can always come back to the marketing strategy, but you can't ignore those insights and those creative sparks. Okay, so we've looked at a lot of principles, a lot of theory, a lot of philosophy around this. Let's look at some practices, how to actually engage in this externalization process, how to actually write in order to think better. As with anything, writing is a skill that compounds in correlation to how habitual it is. And so you want to turn this into a regular habit, daily if possible. That doesn't mean you need to be writing for hours every day, nor is that feasible for most people, but you want to be in the practice of externalization on a frequent basis. And one of the best ways to do this, in my opinion, is Julia Cameron's morning pages, which is 3 pages of longhand stream of consciousness writing. So whatever comes to mind, ideally done first thing in the morning. This is probably the best starting point for anyone who doesn't have a daily or frequent habit. It's demanding enough that it will feel worthwhile, as opposed to just committing to something super easy, like, oh, I'll write for 5 minutes each day, or I'll do a few bullet points. But it's also unstructured enough to not lead to like writer's block or whatever. You can write whatever you want. As Cameron says, pages are meant to be simply the act of moving the hand across the page and writing down whatever comes to mind. Nothing is too petty, too silly, too stupid, or too weird to be included. This is the simplest form of writing as externalization that there is. There's no need to show this to anyone or publish it. It's simply taking the thoughts in your head and putting them on paper. You might write about the person who cut you off in traffic yesterday and how it's still annoying you. Another day you might write about an important decision that you're faced with, or the first 3 pages of a book idea that you have in mind. So get some sort of consistent routine, consistent writing habit, whether it's morning pages or something else. Just get in the flow, get in the habit of doing this. Then we have problem or decision writing. When you have a decision you need to make or a problem you need to solve, and you don't externalize it, then it's very easy to have it sit there and become a burden. Of course, when you have a problem or decision to make, you need to solve the problem and make the decision. Writing isn't going to do that for you, but it can bridge the gap between vagueness and confusion and uncertainty and get you closer to that point where you take action. The reason why it's so powerful is because it brings you face to face with the problem or decision that needs to be made, and you're seeing it on the screen or on the piece of paper. I'll give you an example, which is a non-writing example, but hopefully proves how powerful externalization can be. Often with my coaching clients, they kind of know what they need to do. They know what the decision they need to make is or the problem they need to solve, but it's not until they externalize the decision or problem with someone else, like me as their coach, that it becomes so obvious to them that they can't believe they haven't acted earlier. One of my clients a few months ago was working on a bunch of projects. He had too much on his plate, and he knew this, but he hadn't ever really externalized it properly to someone else or to himself. And so he kind of just dealt with it, like he managed it. It wasn't until we were talking and I mirrored back to him the situation he was in that he realized, damn, I really just have to focus on these 2 things, these 2 projects instead. Now, I don't think writing is a replacement for a coach, but it's certainly useful, right? When you write out problems you're stuck on, when you write about your situation or decisions you need to make, the solutions can often become much clearer. And if it's still not obvious, then you've developed a clearer picture still of the pros and cons perhaps, and your subconscious mind will go to work through that process of incubation, which will eventually lead you to a course of action. With this method of writing, the problem, decision, externalization, I find it really useful to have questions and prompts. So here's a few of them. You can pause this and you can copy them down if you like. Okay, 2 more types of writing to externalize. Note taking. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because other people have covered it in depth. There's a good book called How to Take Smart Notes, which I recommend. And there's a lot of the personal knowledge management guys who've covered this too. What's important to understand is that simply taking notes and copying word for word the highlights in books that you read or whatever else is not really a form of externalization. There's minimal cognitive processing involved in this type of note taking where you're just copying word for word. You really don't have to think. That's not to say you shouldn't copy quotes word for word at all. It should just be one component of your wider note taking practice. And so if you're taking notes, you really want to write them in your own words. If there's a paragraph or a highlight in a book that you like that speaks to you, then synthesize it, write about it, bring in other ideas that you have in your own head, write a couple of paragraphs, whatever, but externalize it in your own way. Another point on this, whether it's note taking or anything else, is that you should prioritize production. So when you're reading a book or an article or you're watching a video and something sparks inspiration for you, it's very tempting to just say, oh, that's a great idea. And then you write down the idea, you put it in your notes app, and then you forget about it and you never do anything with it. I think as much as possible, you should just go write about it there and then. Like, inspiration is fleeting. And if you take the path of laziness and say, oh, I'll come back to it later, you likely never will. I'm not saying you need to write an entire essay whenever you get a spark of inspiration, though that might be a useful thing to do. But you should write a few sentences or paragraphs about whatever comes to mind when this is sparked. You want to store the context, not just the seed of the idea. And so writing a couple of words in the margin of a book is often not enough. The next type of writing, which is perhaps the most powerful way to write and think, is concept formation and synthesis in the form of articles or essays. This is the gold standard of structured thought. You're taking disparate, fragmented ideas and thoughts and putting them into a structured piece of content. It doesn't matter whether you publish this or not. It doesn't matter whether you publish this article, this essay or not, though you should write it as if other people were going to read it because it forces you to be concise and clear. There is a fundamental difference between doing something like morning pages, which we looked at earlier, this free form sort of writing, and this structured formation. When you write an essay or you work really hard to structure thought, there are multiple things you have to do. You need to really think through what you're going to say. And this happens both before and during the process of writing. So something starts as an idea in your head. Perhaps you're writing down some notes about it. Those notes trigger new thoughts and so on. Then you need to outline, you need to structure the topic. And while you might engage in some free form exploratory writing as part of the process, to think and write clearly, you need some sort of logical structure and flow. And so you're developing the skill of being able to structure ideas and break them down in a way that makes sense and flows well. This is a sign of good thinking. Again, it doesn't matter whether you're writing to an audience or to yourself. The practice of this structuring is useful. You outline, you structure, you need to write. It's going to be messy at first, but you'll slowly start to develop your ideas and carve out the sculpture. And you need to edit. You need to refine. This itself is a form of thinking. You're cutting the useful from the non-useful. You're making things clear, succinct. You're improving flow. You're reducing confusion and vagueness. And it's in this editing process that your thinking really starts to get clear because you're cutting away the stuff that's messy and doesn't deserve to be there. Essentially, through this process of writing an essay, you're moving from a primordial idea or set of ideas that are often all over the place into a crystallized, dense structure that acts as proof of work for your thinking. Okay, so that is essentially it. We've looked at a bunch of stuff in this video. We looked at why writing is such a powerful form of thinking, why it's useful to externalize things. We looked at the metacognitive loop of externalization, observation and analysis, and then integration and incubation. We looked at a few writing practices, so morning pages or just developing this consistency, problem and decision writing, proper note taking, and then concept formation and synthesis. And I don't want to end this video without giving you some homework. So here's your homework. It's a writing assignment. If you have made it to this point in the video and you're convinced that you need to write more, then I want you to externalize that. I want you to write a page or two or more about how a writing practice could help you, benefit you in your life, your business, your career, what have you. Write about the ways in which it would help you improve your thinking. Be specific. Write about the problems it would help you solve, the decisions it would help you make. Just get it all out there and write as if you're the strategist of your own life, because you are. But just write and then do it again and do it again. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.